Get started. Hello and welcome to today's presentation, Irrigation Effects on Climate in the U.S. Great Plains. My name is Samantha Gentry and I am an AmeriCorps member serving with Conservation Nebraska's Common Ground program. Conservation Nebraska's mission is to protect our state's natural legacy by educating the public, supporting communities, and increasing civic engagement, which we accomplish through locally led education efforts and community engagement projects to address local conservation concerns. Before the presentation, there are a few housekeeping things to go over. For those online, your cameras will remain off and you will be muted throughout the presentation. Please type any questions you have into the chat or the Q&A, and we will answer those at some point during or after the presentation. For those in person, please feel free to raise your hand when you have a question. Some questions might have to wait until the end of the presentation due to time constraints. This presentation will be recorded and will be uploaded to Conservation Nebraska's YouTube page within the next couple of weeks. So if you missed any part of today's presentation, would like to revisit any part or share it with others, you will be able to find it there. Following the presentation, we will have a very brief survey that should take only a minute to complete for both online and in-person participants. The survey helps support programming like this one, so we appreciate you taking the time to fill those out. If anyone in attendance is interested in speaking with a Conservation Nebraska member regarding conservation issues in Nebraska, or to find out more about what we do, please contact us at info@neconserve.org. I would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Hu. He earned his PhD degree in atmospheric science at Colorado State University in 1992. He worked as a research assistant professor at the University of Missouri-Columbia from 1995 to 1999, and also served as the director of the Missouri Climate Center in the Missouri State and the Missouri State climatologist. He came to the School of Natural Resources at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in 1999. He earned his full professorship at UNL in 2009 and served as the editor of the Journal of Applied Meteorology and Climatology from 2002 to 2022 and has been the editor-in-chief of JAMC since 2023. Please welcome me in joining Dr. Hu.
Thank you. How the microphone works fine. I have to be distant from that. Otherwise it will resonate. Okay, that's fine. Okay, that's good. Okay, yeah. Thank you for coming here on this Saturday to hear this conversation. I would call that conversation about irrigation effect in the regional climate in Nebraska primarily. So in Nebraska, we all know that why is that working?
You can click something. All right, now try.
Okay, thank you. Well, agriculture is the largest business and also major primary revenue for Nebraska. So agriculture is fundamentally important here, and but Nebraska is sitting in a location where natural climate, the precipitation temperature, does not support very productive agriculture. It's pretty marginal climate for agriculture. So from the early settlement time, people realized they had to use irrigation to maintain production, to sustain their life. And those needs actually grew quite dramatically since the 1950s, when groundwater irrigation was brought to the surface, and everybody knew by then, oh, we could use groundwater to irrigate our crops and make a lot of make crops better. So this figure shows the increase or change of the irrigation acreage in Nebraska from this early, what is the late 19th century to 2011. And this dark shade, these two dark shade lines or areas are for irrigated soybean acreage. This is harvest acres from soybeans, like this dark shade, and from corn. You add them together, you see that from 1946, there were like a few million acres of corn irrigated with groundwater, primarily groundwater, and then that irrigated acres increased substantially over the decades till now about 8 million acres every year. Actually, in early 1990s, the irrigated acreage reached the maximum, about 9 million, and now has been slowly decreasing. And then they also picked up in irrigation for growing soybeans. Soybean acreage has increased from primarily 1980s, and then now reaching about 2 million acres. So add them up, we have about 10 million acres of cropland, soybeans and corn irrigate every year. That's the point. Every year, every season, from late May through August, pivots running continuously in the past. Now they are using more conservative measures to manage the irrigation schedule. But that's the recent practice. Before 5 years ago, the pivots were running continuously for those months. That's a lot of water used for 7 million gallons per day. More than that, for 7 million is too small. Anyway, so you can think that huge amount of water is spread over millions of acres of croplands. What does that irrigation do to the land after you spread the water over such a large area? Water added on the surface will, during summertime, will be evaporated, will absorb solar radiation and then evaporate. When it absorbs solar radiation, it cools the surface. So solar radiation reaches the surface supposed to heat the surface, but part of the energy is used to drive the evaporation. So there is only a fraction of the solar energy coming to the surface heats the surface, will be used to heating the surface. So temperature will be cooler than otherwise. And in the meantime, you have the water evaporate. You have enough water, sufficient water for evaporation. So water takes energy and evaporates, and that adds moisture to the atmosphere. There are two effects from that process. One is the surface getting wet. Wet surface is darker. Darker surface can absorb more energy. So there will be more energy absorbed at the surface, even though part of that is going to evaporate. Water not going to directly heat the surface. And the other effect is the moisture increase in the atmosphere. You have moisture evaporate from surface and get into the atmosphere to moisten the atmosphere and then change the stability structure of the atmosphere. So those two effects are called climatic effects of irrigation. And how those effects may influence the regional climate, because this irrigation is not just you turn on your irrigation in your backyard or yard and then you water it for every other day or every twice a week or something. It's continuously run for several months. So that is a huge amount. That this effect is continuous, persistent over those months. So then there should be some sort of persistent effect to the regional climate. And what is that persistent effect? And how is that effect affecting the regional climate? Is our climate getting cooler, getting wetter, or otherwise? So what is it? Those are the questions we want to answer, because irrigation is a supplementary source of water, and it has a limit. If you look at the groundwater level map for recent, the 1995 or 2005, the most recent is 2015 or 17, you see the substantial decrease of groundwater level across the Oglala aquifer. And that decrease is primarily caused by groundwater irrigation use, the extraction of water from the groundwater resource and to supply for the crop growth and production. So then if groundwater continues to decrease, and at some point, conservation measures will have to be enforced. Like now, some enforcement of policies are actually in place for people to put meters on their wells, and also give them sort of limits or quota for how much irrigation water they can use in the growing season. So the concern is that if the water is continuing decreasing, then at some point we have to either reduce the amount or rate of irrigation use of groundwater, or completely turn it off. And when that happens, what will be the situation? What will be the climate, which has been sort of tuned to the water supply for those months over these 4 decades, 5 decades, or 6 decades? All of a sudden, without that water supply, moisture supply, and temperature, mean temperature situation, so then what would be the climate like when that happens, when the groundwater irrigation is stopped? So that's a concern. If that is, are we going back to the 1950s and the 30s, like in the Dust Bowl era, or are we going to be fine, like in the current climate? If you use your memory, you probably think that our climate, Nebraska's climate, in the past 50 years has been pretty mild. We haven't had such kind of severe droughts like 1930s Dust Bowl, 1950s continuous severe droughts is devastating to society. So those are the questions. What would be happening? What would be the case, or what would happen if the irrigation using groundwater is going to be stopped because of the you cannot access the to the groundwater? So this work is trying to address those questions. The method we use to address that question is before I go to the model, go to the method. This is the evidence showing, this is observed evidence showing that regional climate might have been affected by this continuous and also large scale irrigation practice in this region. And here I show the precipitation variation for Nebraska, average for Nebraska. There are 3 panels here. The first panel is the first panel on the where's the cursor? Well, this is okay. So that is I'm outward with this. This is the panel A, just like follow the ABCs would be easier. Panel A is a May precipitation for Nebraska over the years from 1900 to 2020. Well, you see the natural fluctuations, annual variations of precipitation in that month. And then you see this dark black line showing an increase, so a slight trend of going up. So there is an slight increase of May precipitation months to the 12 months over those 120 years. And that increase is significant, meaning that 90%, 95% time, in the month of May, the precipitation will be following this trend. So keep going up, at least going up, it has been going up for the last 120 years. Well, you see if you follow the sort of up and down, the variations of those green line, the green line, you see that there is a sort of slight decrease from 1900 to about 1950 or 60, and then there is an increase going from that year to the year 2020. So there is, although this whole trend is upward, there is this sort of internal or inside those sub scale variation of this substantial increase of precipitation for month May after 1960. And the similar trend is seen in the month of June, but not very not significant. It's strong enough, it's clearly saying, but it's not a significant, statistically significant. And then you have this also annual precipitation. So that's the total year, every year's precipitation for Nebraska over those 20 years. You also see this increase of precipitation. So this is could be a coincidence of because here the point is that this is the rise of the precipitation after 1960s from here out going up there. And so why is that a coincidence, or why worry about that change? Because that's a period of time when irrigation added to the region, or massive irrigation added to the region. So are these coincidence or some real physical processes happening in this region as a result of irrigation? So now we come to the method about how to address that question. Well, again, I keep getting ahead of myself. See, these results, as I showed in these panels, ABC, showing this long-term trend. Well, it's easy to sort of miss some important things because you have this up and down, the very natural variations, and you have this trend. The trend is saying that, okay, you have some slight weak trend of increasing precipitation in the growing season also on an annual scale. Then what may be important from these variations is this finding. That is, if we count the dry years of those, from those precipitation variations, dry year would be, in this case, would be some points like here, 1930, 1950, and this will be late 60s, and also recent decades like this is like a 1992, 94, and this is 2008. That's a dry year. So you see those very dry years, and you also see those very wet years for the point to be on the upper half of these panels. So if you count those things, let's focus on dry years. Count those points in the lower half of the panel. First one, just use that one as example. You will find that over the first half of this 120-year period, there were 60 years. Well, there were 30, well, not more than 36. Yeah, there were 36 dry years, extreme dry years, in those 60 years from 1900 to 1960. That's 60 years. We had 36 very dry years, and then you count the dry years from 1961 through 2020, you find only 25 very dry summers. So if you do a simple calculation, you find that in the first 60 years, 60% of those years suffered severe drought. Well, Dust Bowl 1950s drought, those are examples of those severe droughts. And then after 1960, from 1961 through 2020, like in the previous slides show here, you find only, well, there are only 25 dry years, so it'll be about 40% or a little slightly over 40% of the years with severe droughts. Severe droughts, well, if you do a severity examination, you find that the severity of the droughts in the 60 years from 1900 to 1960 is much severer than the severity of the droughts after 1960. So there are clearly indications of change of climate, at least in the drought perspective. From 1900 to 1960, those 66 decades, we had more drought, more frequent droughts, and more severe droughts. Then from 1960 through 2020, the second 60-year period, we have had 40% of the time with drought, but the drought severity was also milder than the droughts in the prior 66 decades. So you see that's the clear indication of some changes of climate in this region. And is that change related to the irrigation? Because, as I said, coincidentally, irrigation picked up in late 1950s and has been continuously running for the recent 6 decades. So now that's a question for, well, this is a question we put together, summarize what I mentioned earlier about the concerns we have with irrigation. So is the increased acreage of and also intensity of the irrigation may have reshaped the climate in this region, well, based on the observations of less frequent and less severe drought in this recent 6 decades when irrigation has been in practice in this region. So now we can discuss about the research plan. So the research plan is primarily trying to address those questions. In order to answer those questions, we need to have a tool that can allow us to evaluate or separate the irrigation effect from no irrigation situation. So then that in reality, that will be, in real world, that is not possible unless we actually have some colleagues, they were trying to do such kind of experiment in the Sand Hills, but it didn't work out as planned. So the practical way would be to use a model. Model is just a bunch of equations describing the uncertain process, the surface process, and then you use that, you code those equations in a program and run the program with given boundary conditions, initial conditions, those things. And then you can specify in that among those conditions what the surface would be. Surface is a crop, and then surface is irrigated or not irrigated. So we can run this model with no irrigation, with the same crops, but no irrigation. See what the result will be, what precipitation will be, what temperature will be, and what the circulation will be. And then we can run the model with the same crop, but with irrigation, and see how the difference that run will be from the previous no irrigation run. So by comparison, we can quantify what the irrigation effect on precipitation, on temperature, under circulation in the region. So that's the plan for our study. So this is a domain or model domain we're using to evaluate the irrigation effect. So here you can see we have the outer domain, the bigger area that covers most of the continental United States and South Canada is the domain. And then we have a inner domain, which is marked by the light colored lines. This is this box inside the continental United States. It is centered at the Great Plains. So that way we can, this is a more technical issue, we can avoid the boundary effect on the irrigation effect. That is our focus in the center of the study domain. So we don't have to worry about the boundary effect or influence or interference with the effect of the irrigation in this area. And then we can now, we have to add the irrigation acreages where irrigation took place, or which land areas, which area has irrigation or no irrigation. So this is the irrigation distribution in your model's inner domain. In this, the next slide shows the irrigation within this light colored box, light colored boundary box there. So you see that the major irrigation, which is color coded there, is in Nebraska, so mostly central, south central Nebraska, and some on the west side, and also up in the northeast Nebraska. That's the where's the river? But this is where's the river basin there. Then you have also some in the in southwest Kansas and the panhandle of Oklahoma, and also panhandle of the Texas. These areas, Texas, the irrigation in Texas, these areas have lost their irrigation because of the substantial decrease of groundwater level in those areas. But we put them there just to see how that irrigation or no irrigation would affect the low-level jet, which is a process that brings moisture to the central Great Plains, to the northern plains, Nebraska. So these are the irrigation configuration in our model. And then we can now run the case to see how irrigation is affecting the local, regional, like we are focusing on the Nebraska, Kansas, North Kansas region, the climate, precipitation, temperature in that area. Before we can do that, we have to make sure that the model is able to describe the precipitation, the climate in this studied area accurately enough for us to trust the result when we are doing the actual simulation. So this is this pair of figures shows the model validation result. Basically, the one on the left side shows the model simulated precipitation for this particular year. So this study is a case study for the year of 2012, which was a dry year, pretty dry. So we use that. And then later on, we had some work to study dry and wet, more dry years, 5 dry years, and also had 5 wet years to see whether the result from this case study still works, still valid for those general cases. And it turned out the result from this study is generally applicable to all those dry years. So the left panel here shows the comparison between the model simulated precipitation from May 1st through September 27th in the year of 2012. To compare the model simulation with the observation, which is shown by the black line in that figure, we see that the models captured all the precipitation events, although the magnitude is off in many cases, many events. So that's the limitation of the model. And the model can be tuned, can be changed, revised to make simulation better. This would be the best outcome from those practices. So model has limitation, but model can simulate those events. That's the key thing. If a precipitation event took place and it can be simulated the model, then we can be certain that the model captures the weather process, atmospheric process that generate that precipitation event. Then the amount is a second issue. Amount, I said second issue is because if the model produces precipitation event as observed, that's important because the model will produce a amount of precipitation in that event. Then we can use that amount as a reference and then compare the model simulation with and without precipitation to that reference value and see if irrigation added to the model simulation will result in increase or decrease or no change of that to that reference value. So that's the idea for this comparison. So for that purpose, this simulation with the limitation of the accuracy and magnitude is acceptable. And more importantly, that the simulation for the model captures the diurnal cycle of the low-level jet. We heard this we know this probably, you probably have heard this low-level jet. It's a low-level stream in the atmosphere coming from the Gulf of Mexico through Texas, then western Missouri, and then Kansas, and going to Nebraska, and then further north, split one branch to the others to the east side, and one branch to South Dakota to the west side. And that moisture stream, that stream brings moisture from the Gulf of Mexico to this central US, and is a primary fuel for summer storms, precipitation. And we often have nocturnal storms. You think nocturnal time or nighttime is supposed to be the most stable time for atmospheric condition. But in our place, it's just the opposite during the summer season. It's because at nighttime, the low-level jet is the strongest. So it brings large amount of moisture to this place and also causes instability in the atmosphere. So this figure shows that mechanism is described accurately by this model, because that's a moisture process, very important for evaluating the irrigation effect. So that feature of the model is very important. So these results from model validation support the validity of the model for use in evaluation of this irrigation effect. So after the model is validated, now we can use the model to test our that's not hypothesis, but test our to produce results which can be used to answer our questions. So now here are the results. This figure shows upper panel, lower panel shows the results of the irrigation effect on precipitation in Nebraska. This is for that particular year of 2012. And as I said, following study of 5 wet years, at least for those 5 dry years, we got the same results. So what is the result? What does the result tell us? Look at the upper panel of this figure. We show this panel shows the precipitation for that same period from May 1st through September 27th. And the same precipitation events over those months. And the blue line, let's see, the red line there shows the simulation, which is the same as this one, the one showing on the left panel there. The red line. That's the red line, the same red lines here showing here. These are the models simulate precipitation with irrigation. And then you compare that with the blue line. That's a model simulate irrigation, model simulate precipitation without irrigation. So you see that there are quite some differences in most of the events during those months between the irrigated and non-irrigated cases, runs. And there are differences shown in the lower panel by the green line. So you see the green line, most of those differences are above the zero line there, meaning that with irrigation, you have every precipitation event will produce more precipitation than without irrigation. Well, there are some negative things. There are a few negative things in this place. Careful analysis of these negative things is just because the timing of the irrigation, timing of the precipitation between these two simulations. If you have a say increase of see that blue line there, that is a peak precipitation from the simulation without irrigation. And that event occurred behind or just later than the occurrence of the same event in the simulation with irrigation. So that causes big dip there. But overall, you see irrigation increases the precipitation amount in each event. That's okay. So you have irrigation in this magnitude, then your precipitation amount every time when precipitation takes place will be more than otherwise. So that's the key finding from this work. Because you have more precipitation every time it rains, then you have more reserve of water in the soil. That reservation or that reserve of moisture in the soil can fend off, can retard the development of drought. So that is a possible explanation that we have fewer drought and fewer severe drought in the years or decades when precipitation has been used in agricultural production. To be specific, we see that in that year, 2012, the 2020, as I said, is a dry year. In the simulation with irrigation, the dry condition is about is at 75% of the average. So meaning that in the year 2012, it produced 75% of precipitation on average of the summer. That's for irrigation case. If without irrigation, then the amount of precipitation produced is only 56%. So it's about 20% less precipitation without irrigation. So that is quite a drop. And that drop can be critical because when a drought is developing, if you don't have enough moisture to stop it, it can grow. And then based on the based on what I discussed in the previous talk, it can establish a surface condition that favors drought continuation and intensification. So now with irrigation now you have more precipitation that can delay or retard the development of drought. And before the drought reaches critical point to explode, next precipitation event could happen and then suppress it completely. So that can be an explanation for what we observed earlier, as I discussed. There have been only 40% of drought in the decades with irrigation, I'm sorry, compared to like 60% of drought, severe drought in the years without irrigation. And then what is causing that to increase the precipitation when you have irrigation? Well, we did some detailed analysis and found that the increased precipitation is primarily due to the additional supply of moisture. As the surface is wet, then solar radiation will evaporate water from irrigation. Then that water apparently, or that water based on our analysis, will stay in the region and then support precipitation, and by increasing precipitation rate. Say the precipitation event, each event didn't change its duration, didn't change its occurrence time. Only the magnitude or rate of precipitation changed when you have irrigation introduced. So introduced doesn't change the frequency or occurrence time of precipitation, but increase precipitation rate by 0.46 millimeter per day. That 0.6 millimeter per day you think is very tiny, but every day you add that little amount, and then over some months you get a huge amount of precipitation, large enough to change the climate situation and to prevent drought from developing. So then there is people would ask, well, this is just irrigation effect. What about climate? Do you have a climate impact? Because climate change, climate is getting, some places getting wetter, some places getting drier. Is this place getting wetter? Well, that question can be addressed by this, or by something on by what I wrote on this slide. You think what we did in our simulation is comparison of two cases, one with irrigation, one without irrigation, with the same climate environment or the same boundary condition forcing. So climate in this case is not a factor here, because we use the same climate forcing for these two simulations, one with, one without irrigation. So the difference I described earlier or showed on earlier slide, those differences are solely from the irrigation effect. So that can be that sort of suspicion of climate impact on this change of precipitation rate can be discarded. So here, the differences I described or we got from this analysis are solely from irrigation effect. So to summarize, then the irrigation does have a very critical effect on precipitation and growing season climate in this heavily irrigated area. And if you go specific to how this effect of irrigation can be interpreted, we can see that irrigation has two effects. One is direct effect, one is indirect effect. The direct effect is what I described there. You have irrigation will add moisture to the atmosphere. That's pretty straightforward. And that added moisture to the atmosphere, fortunately, is not spread downwind or downstream, but used in local precipitation event. And as a result, we increase the precipitation rate without changing the precipitation frequency or frequency and also starting time or ending time of the or duration of the precipitation events. And that little amount, 0.46 millimeter per day over the growing season can add to a dramatic amount, significant enough to change the amount of precipitation in the growing season and suppress severe drought development. And there is an indirect effect of irrigation, that is by influencing the low-level jet, as I described earlier. Well, as I said, low-level jet is a primary moisture engine. brings moisture from Gulf of Mexico to the central US. And our analysis show that we have irrigation is actually weakening that flow, that moisture flow from the Gulf to the central US. But if you add those, decrease the effect of moisture transport from the low jet to the central US and the direct effect from evaporation of moisture, you'll find that these two cancel each other, not cancel each other. The direct effect is going to be overpowering the indirect effect. And the difference is that 0.46 millimeter per day increase of precipitation. So irrigation does have a sort of negative effect on precipitation by weakening the moisture transport from the Gulf of Mexico to the central US. But it has this direct effect of adding moisture to the atmosphere. And that effect is overpowering or is more important or larger than the indirect effect. And their difference is that 0.46 millimeter per day increase of precipitation during the growing season. And that increased amount is sufficient to explain the slight increase of precipitation in the growing season and also decrease of the frequency and severity of the drought in this region in the recent 60 years. Thank you.
All right, before we get into questions, I would like to take a moment to launch the survey online and then also pass out the surveys in person. We will collect the surveys on your way out of the auditorium, and we'll leave the survey open in the chat until all questions have been answered. Then we have the mic for questions in person. And for those online, you can place your questions in the Q&A section or in the chat. And then I do have a question. You talked about the weather research and forecasting tool, the simulator. Is that a public online tool?
Yeah, that's that model was originally developed by was long history, but it's now it's a standard tool, standard model. That's a regional model, developed and also sustained by people in the National Center for Atmospheric Research, Boulder, Colorado. So instead of having individual research groups developing their own tools or model, that's very costly and also time consuming. The system, I think the National Science Foundation funded that center, the National Center for Atmospheric Research, from a group of people there. It's called Mesoscale, some MMM section. Those people developed this primarily to advance this model from a very preliminary tool in early 1990 to this stage is a weather research and forecasting model, which has become a very popular and primary tool for understanding processes in the atmosphere. So,
thank you.
I have a question about your predictions or what kind of patterns you're going to be looking at, like if and when Nebraska has to use less, or the region has to use less water when we irrigate. What are you predicting may happen, like if that reduction is required?
So that's a good question. That's a conservation question, right? It's relevant to this program. We want to make production, sustain production, agricultural production, which is fundamental for people in the state. But in the meantime, we want to have a sustainable resource, have the sustainable resource that we can use to maintain the economy and the people's life there. So there is a balance. We have to somehow to figure out where is the critical point, what balance we should be looking for. As you said, when is the time? When is the time to start the process of reducing irrigation? That process has started. As I said, many irrigated areas or irrigated farmers have been given the quota, like 16 inches per growing season, along some sensitive regions like the Republican River basin and other basins in the central central Nebraska, south central Nebraska also. So the policymakers, I believe, have recognized this threat, primarily from the cry of groundwater monitoring people. They have reported this decrease of groundwater level substantially in many areas over the Ogallala Aquifer. Well, a practical direct example is the Panhandle of Texas. There you have they have lost their groundwater irrigation because of no access to the hard access. You have to have really a lot using a lot of power to extract water from 50 to 100 meters below the surface. So that practice has started, and then how that implication will work, how many people will really follow that restriction. I think people have to follow because they have a meter. Many people have meters on their wells, so when the annual amount is reached, the meter will lock the well from being used anymore. So that is like a hard way to restrict the water use. And then the next, so this practice has been on, and I hope people, but at the same time, you have the limitation on water use, then people will have to find a way to grow their crops without the water they had used before. So that is a dilemma. What is how the government, what the government would do to compensate the farmers for their crop loss, for example, because of limited usage of limited access to groundwater in their irrigation. So it's a very complicated situation, and it requires all participations of the parties in this equation, in this society, to determine, to find the best approach to conserve the resources and also without loss of economic production or agricultural production. So that's a difficult situation, reality, and but then the consequence can be very serious, because if say the irrigation is well, if we don't have this restriction or this plan, then the groundwater can be exhausted in a short period until 20 years or so, as some people have predicted. Then what will happen? Are we going back to that is another research topic? Are we going to back to this 1930s or the 1950s, or what? So that's something. Yeah, that's the major prediction issue. If as I said, that's a research topic. We could write a proposal to see, okay, we're going to run some models to see if the irrigation is well. Based on this, definitely we're going to have more dry years. If see that 0.46 millimeter per day increase precipitation is removed, but because of turn off the irrigation, then we have a favorable sort of vulnerable. We put ourselves in a vulnerable situation for severe drought to develop, because not much buffering effect to keep the drought from not coming, also this severe drought from not coming. So there are some severe consequences. So it's urgent for us to find solutions to those, at least direction to those questions, what would be, and then inform the policymakers so they can make adequate, sustainable decisions for the society.
Okay, I have another question. What are your thoughts on, so if there's more precipitation happening, but then also irrigation is also increasing, are there just more and more crops being planted, or is the irrigation just not effective, or is it just being evaporated too quickly? I would just think if you're watering, if you're irrigating more, but there's also more rain, you would think you wouldn't have to water as much if there's more rain.
Right, that's the, yes, that's the extension, I have an extension point, that's actually my goal to not educate farmers, to persuade farmers to not irrigate when you have rain on the way. But that's really a challenge there. Weather predictions are hardly accurate. So if, for a lot of farmers, they can't afford to miss one rain event. See, the original plan, so we had this plan in the past. We want to persuade farmers to turn off their faucet or their pivots, their irrigation system, because a rain event is coming. So they don't have to double water or waste the water, because additional water will become surface runoff and cause some pollution to the river, to the ecosystems. But then they will ask, are your predictions accurate enough? Can I rely on that? The most important thing is that if you miss this, or your prediction is missed, is not real, didn't happen, I lost my production. Who is going to cover the cost? That's the thing. So for people who make these predictions, if they are taking responsibilities, or some part of responsibilities for the losses caused by their inaccurate prediction, then the farmers would be easy to access, or easier to adapt or to take their advice, saying, okay, a rain is coming, you're based on your prediction, and I'm going to follow your suggestion, turn off my pivots. And then rain did come, then everything would be fine. But yeah, if otherwise, then the thing is that crop growth or crop production profits are critically relying on those individual events. If you miss an event, then you turn off the pivots. The pivot produce or add 1 inch water per 3 days. So if they turn off for a few days, then that 1 inch is not there. The corn won't grow, as won't yield as high as otherwise. So then there will be a loss of yield, and there loss of profit, loss of production. So that's the risk these are facing. And if somebody can take that risk, share the risk with them, that'd be easier. Things will be easier. But that won't be happening, because we can tell them, okay, this forecast has been accurate for 60% of the time. That's probably the best you can say. 60% of the time in the past. So, but then now this one is telling us there will be a major rain event coming. So can you turn off your pivots to save some water? And then that's a hard question, a hard decision to make for farmers, because they don't want to take the risk to lose their annual yield, annual production. Then who's going to pay for that difference, the loss? So that's the part. There's a lot of this public education and building experience, confidence with specific predictions or forecasts made by this federal government, the NOAA and other local agencies, so they can build those information, knowledge into their irrigation scheduling, and they can save water, save money, and just actually become more profitable, because turn on the faucet, turn on the pivots, turn off, turn on pivots cost money. So that's the issue. And yeah, currently or in the past at least, there was, as I said, pivots were on all season, regardless of rain or not. So that was definitely wasting a lot of water and also caused a lot of pollution. And now that has been substantially reduced. We have a project now telling farmers to turn off their faucet, to turn off their pivots. And we found that from interaction with farmers, many of them have been frequently turning off their pivots by saving water. And so that's a very good sign, encouraging for further application of these more technologies to aid their irrigation scheduling to save water, increase their crop, and also reduce the pollution to the environment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have what may be a quick follow-up to that. If I heard you right, you said that it cost the farmers money to turn off their pivots?
No, turn on.
To turn it back on?
Yeah, turn on. You have to generate because groundwater is deep. You have to run the motor for quite some time for the water to pump up and then start irrigating. Turn off is pretty straightforward. Turn off doesn't cost anything. Turn on will cost you fuel, electricity to bring water from deep down there to the surface, then start irrigation. So every time you turn on, we'll have this sort of pre-irrigation time or some, what do you call this, period before water can start irrigate. You have to bring the water from down there, 30 meters, 50 meters below to the surface, and then start irrigation. That takes fuel and electricity. So every time you turn on your pivots, will take some time and also energy, money to make it work before it works. Yeah. So that's why it's not easy for them to turn off. When you have deep groundwater level, then it will take more time and also more energy to bring the water to the surface, start irrigation. So that will be a waste of money. If you leave the system there, it will just keep spreading, keep irrigating. So it's not some extra money to be used in that process. So a lot of details, difficult to resolve, difficult to resolve, and to make some policies to. Every farmers are different in their situation, so we have to work with them individually, their landscape situation, their irrigation systems, all those things. Yeah. But here we're just saying irrigation does affect regional precipitation. At least it has done some good and positive things to reduce severe droughts for us in this area. And but in the meantime, there is a threat that if irrigation stops, then we may go back to this drought-prone climate. That can be some difficult. There could be some difficult times then in that case, if that happens.
Thank you.
All right, if we don't have any more questions, then that concludes this presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Hu, for your time and expertise with us today. Thank you to the Nebraska History Museum for hosting this event, and thanks to everyone who joined us live and in person and online for this event. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.